We're going to cover what kind of defines modern warfare and talk about aspects of modern warfare today. Just to give you a quick roadmap, we're going to break roughly into 3 sections. First section, we're going to talk about some of the aspects of ancient warfare that distinguish it from modern warfare. And then we're going to talk about the transition period to what we're going to call modern, and some of the critical factors that cause that facilitated that transition and that characterize it. And then we'll talk about how that comes forward to today and the things that characterize today's modern battlefields. And so, without any further ado, I'll give each of the panelists a chance to say a couple things about themselves. Try and keep it under a minute.
I'm Scott Tarbet. I am a novelist. The best credit I can claim is that I have a lot of friends who are current military and ex-military, high-ranking of various kinds, and they're great for research.
My name is Bacera. I am actually a military fantasy writer, and I can say that because my book was supposed to be here for LTUE, but it's actually stuck in Great Space. So it'll be here tomorrow, but then I'm going to say, hey, look, here's a book that I wrote military fans on. But I am, like our moderator, I really am a history enthusiast. My current focus right now is Napoleonic era wars, so if you want me to tell you French names for Napoleonic era military tactics, I'm the person for it. And I also love reading military history is my only nonfiction that I ever participate in. Everything else is in fiction. So.
Peter Nealen, former Marine, 9.5 years in the Marine Corps, 8 of them active as a reconnaissance Marine. Spent some time in Iraq, a little less time in Afghanistan. Got out in 2012. I now write. I've got 6 military thrillers out, and 5 military thrillers out, and 3 more supernatural things about, go figure, a former Marine shooting monsters in the face. So, also a student of warfare, as it was my profession for the better part of a decade. So.
Excellent. All right, so for the panel.
Quick question. You guys all have one?
We do require liquid sustenance.
Let's go ahead and pass them along so they've got a second.
I was actually going to grab one after intros.
I'm good.
All right. So, first question for the panel then. Talk to us about ancient warfare. I'm going to give each of you a chance to have a little spiel. Give us a few minutes of what you think were the key things that characterize ancient warfare as it differentiates from modern warfare. And then once you each said something, we'll open up for a few questions from the audience. And then we'll move on to the second section. All right? So, Peter, why don't you go first this time?
See, a lot of my focus tends a lot of the time to be on more continuities, ways that what was old is still relevant. Classic example of that was I worked briefly after I got out for a combat tracking company. We taught man tracking to Marines and soldiers, and these guys had worked up a scenario for a unit they were training, and promptly got brought up by the commander wondering where they had gotten this information, because this was brand new TTPs, tactics, techniques and procedures, that had just been reported used by the Taliban in Afghanistan and hadn't been declassified yet. And these guys said, we read about Vietnam and Rhodesia. That's where we got it. So a lot of the differences you're going to find are predominantly technological and cultural.
Michael?
Cool. So me and Scott actually, we had a really late night, midnight discussion about this.
Yeah, you guys really missed out.
Well, our moderator was sleeping.
That panel went for hours.
But so I will give my viewpoint as a historian, right? As a person who reads too much military history. And I think that the biggest defining feature between what we're calling ancient, I guess I'd say classical, I'll go classical, like classical warfare. Yeah, pre-modern warfare.
Modern warfare is what we're about. So let's talk about everything pre-modern and how it changed.
So the biggest difference you'll see, and it really is about technology, but the logistical technology. So in a lot of classical and ancient warfare, most battles that was it. The battle was the thing. Like you had a lot of people dancing around, there were politics, there were movement of forces, they were getting people to place, and then they had one battle, and that was it. Whoever won the battlefield, they won the war, because pretty much that was it. That was all you could do. That was all my people. Those are all my knights on the field. I got nobody else left. I'm defeated.
And if winter caught you first, you were
Yeah, right. And then we get the transition right into World War I, where all of a sudden we have trains, we have canned food, we have the ability to transport people great miles in wonderful logistics. I mean, if you ever get a chance to take a look at the train schedules for for Russian soldiers and getting them to the front, how amazing that was, how they worked in logistical organizations to get them all in the front at the same time with all their gear and with all their command structure. And so wars in modern warfare, they can go on forever. And you can keep on killing people until there ain't no more people to kill. And that's a bad thing, but it's also, I think it's the defining trait of modern warfare is that we can make wars last a whole lot longer.
Okay, you're doing the second section.
Okay. So that's,
Is there anything else you want to say about the first section?
That's
All right,
it.
it's okay
One
if we
battle.
keep the first section short.
One cool battle.
Now I lost track of what the first section was.
We're really defining pre-modern
Pre-modern.
warfare. Characteristics of it,
Pre-modern.
the things that change.
To me, it's simple. It's the internal combustion engine.
Okay.
End of
So you
sentence.
didn't have it.
Mic drop.
All right.
No tanks. No
Does
tanks.
anybody have any questions they want to ask about things that were different in pre-modern warfare, or should we just move on to the second section? All right, let's do it. Oh wait, there's a question.
All right. Jacob Badger, potential novelist. Anyway, I was actually wondering what your guys' opinion would be on pre-modern warfare naval capacity. Back when everything
How was
needed-
different specifically in a naval context?
Yeah, how was
Okay.
it different when everything needed to be cut down from trees?
what he said,
Internal combustion engine.
and gunpowder.
Yeah. I mean, definitely the idea of like not having like fuel changes the naval game a lot. So
If you're becalmed for a month, you're not gonna be moving on the enemy because you've got no wind. If you've got fuel in the boiler, you're going.
Like a lot of other aspects in the division between classic warfare and modern warfare, there's one of them in naval history that marks the transition, and that's the Great White Fleet that the United States sent around the world, that Teddy Roosevelt purposely painted all of his battleships white so
That's
that
very-
they could be seen from everywhere.
tactically, that's very good choice, right? White
True.
battleship.
And he steamed them around the world. I mean, people had been around the world. They'd been around the world all the way back to Magellan. But he made the statement for the entire world to see, I can project force anywhere on the globe within about 20 miles of a coastline, which is 80% of the world population.
Excellent. Okay, unless there are any other questions, we'll move on to the second section.
Well, you got anything to say about it? I want to hear your thoughts.
I'm more than happy to contribute. I really think we've covered it pretty well, though, in terms of transitions. One of the things that we talked about a little bit, and we're going to transition into right now, is the idea that are those supply chains, right? The ability to get people there, but also the ability to maintain people there. In ancient battlefields, and it's still, today we destroy the cities when we go through them, right? But a battlefield is frequently not in a city, in an ancient context. And so having supplies there, then getting them to the location of the battlefield, and sometimes it can be much more difficult to acquire supplies along the way or where they needed to be. And transportation was lacking engines. Yes?
I have one quick question for you. You mentioned, in old wars, it was, kind of the one battle and that was it. But there are historical cases of where there were multiple battles. Is that a case of
So
we are going all in on
So
this?
the
it's either all
typical,
or nothing?
counter example to that is the 100 Years' War, right? Which is 114 years, and they say like, well, that was more than one battle. So if we look at it numbers games wise, and so we're gonna say that a major battle is, we're talking about 8% or more losses of combatant forces, right? Something like that. This is annihilation, decimation. Like people cannot leave the battlefield. And in the 100 Years' Wars, there's a lot of skirmishes and a lot of sieges. And skirmishes and sieges mess people up, and there are losses, but they're not total losses. And usually one side is severely under, they're underarmed or they're underfed in one of those situations. So there's an obvious winner or loser. But this is, when we're talking about major battle, I feel like it's when two opposing combatant forces put what they got on the line, and then they duke it out, and the person wins, right? Like, so Napoleonic, like Battle of Waterloo. Like, there's a lot of stuff in between a campaign between Napoleon being sent to, being, like, you know, leaving France and coming back. There's a lot of tiny battles, sure, but the Battle of Waterloo is that one, that knockout battle, and then pretty much everything else is just cleanup, right?
Okay.
To
so
re-
we're
to
one big
reinforce that.
knockout.
Right,
Yeah.
to reinforce that,
Okay.
we can look back from a historical standpoint and say Napoleon was done when he retreated from Moscow. We know,
Oh, yeah.
we know
Yes.
that.
That's 80%. That's over 80% of his total imperial forces. Yeah,
Right,
correct.
but he was not defeated for, how long was it between Moscow and Waterloo?
10 years?
Yeah, it's a long time. But he was done as a world force when he had that huge attrition.
Yeah. So the thing is, like in classical warfare, when you lose a battle, you lose your status to be able to fight battles for quite a long time.
Okay.
But nowadays, like the standard operating procedure for American theaters of war is that we're supposed to be able to to fight in two major and three minor. You got that? You got it right?
It's
2 minor and 3 major, or 3 major?
two major and one minor.
Oh, okay. Okay. So
Trust me, that's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't been able to do
Very
that for a while.
fluid,
But that's the idea, right? Is that we're supposed to be able to have the ability to fight 2 wars at the same time, and America should still be able to do it. That's how good our logistic reach is nowadays. Yeah, let's continue.
We have one more question.
Theoretic, yes.
Following on the same thing with the earlier question, when you're talking about like a knockdown and drag out, you know, in the ancient times, the closest comparison I know is the Palatea. Would that be more or less what you're talking about?
Yeah, so there's like things like, it's basically that the two opposing forces, they'll maneuver all their forces to one battlefield, and they will have it out. Like all that other stuff, that's just dancing beforehand, right? That's just foreplay. But you get to this battle, and pretty much afterwards it's cleanup. You know, like all the famous battles you hear about in like movies, those are usually just those are the knockout battles.
Chirnea,
Yeah, Thermopylae.
Zama.
Yeah. So I mean, the first one we have in recorded history is actually on the Battle of Megiddo, which is where we get the term Armageddon, and it's those two forces had it out. And after that battle, they decided like, hey, we should stop killing each other.
Well,
Not as
they've been
fun as we
decided,
thought it was
right?
gonna be.
And so here, that leads us to, let's go into the modern era, and let's talk about some of the tactics that then proliferate where we can continue to fight battles. That, maybe there was a big battle, and maybe the big battle was lost, but it's not over in the same way it was then. So I'm gonna have Scott go first this time, and then Michael, you go first on the last one.
Scott's better looking, so
Let's
That's why.
much better. Russia, when we're talking about extended supply lines, ongoing battles, starting with Napoleon and all the way through Adolf Hitler, the Germans were able to project thousands of miles of supply lines because they had the internal combustion engine. My mind wants to go off on the actual dividing line, the First World War, when the internal combustion engine actually came into play, and you were able to project force and project control for a long, long way around the world. Nowadays, we fly one bombing missions from the continental United States to the Middle East. We do that. The other side of the world, one pilot, doesn't even take 2 pilots anymore, doesn't even take a pilot.
sometimes it doesn't even take the pilot.
Yeah, it doesn't even take a pilot. Doesn't even take a pilot anymore. But, yeah, just that guy in a chair with a joystick, right? He's sitting in Southern California, he gets up in the morning in his tract home, he kisses his wife goodbye, he puts on a green jumpsuit, he drives out to a trailer in the desert, he kills a few hundred people, and he goes home for dinner. That is modern warfare.
And we're gonna get to that.
Okay.
But right now,
Yeah,
let's
I
focus
jumped.
on the transition and really the change.
Okay.
These fundamental critical changes.
We think about Hannibal as this great military genius because he was able to move his army about 350, 400 miles when he had looped around into Central Europe and came down, attempted to come over got over the Alps with his elephants. That was a huge deal. Huge deal. And it took him all of one campaign season through the winter and most of the next campaign season to get down onto the Italian peninsula. Contrast that with the end of the First World War, because there really wasn't a Second World War. There was only one World War. It was the First World War with little intermission, and then it finished.
This is not a peace, but an armistice for 20 years.
That's right. When the Germans figured it out, Guderian figured it out, Rommel figured it out. On our side, Patton figured it out. You don't have to do these slow advances. You don't have to slug it out in trench warfare. You blitzkrieg. You go fast. You go from the German border to Paris, and in all-out war, it's over in a couple of weeks. Okay, that's the dividing line to me.
For me, the transition is it's logistics. That's one of the things I think we never talk about it. You know, like you don't see like logistics personnel like in war movies. You know, you don't see the guy carrying the ammo to the front. Like he's not really featured a lot in the war movies. He doesn't get to wave the flag at the very end of the movie. But logistics is amazing. The ability to get people to keep fighting. You know, I mean, as much as video games would like you to not believe, soldiers need ammo and soldiers need food. And if you can't get ammo and food to people, then you can't keep fighting. So logistics, I think, is the ability to extend logistic lines beyond sight. And then before it used to be like, your logistic lines are there roads? Can I travel by horse? But now it's logistic lines are crazy. You know, like how far can I see electronically? How far can I communicate by radio? You know, like logistic lines are amazing. How far can I airlift something? I mean, that's amazing. You know, have something with jet fuel burning.
And if we focus on the transition period, right? We talked about World War I and logistics. We're going from with the combustion engine, with trains, but even trains are great, but trains are on tracks, right? When you take the combustion engine, you put it in a truck.
Put in a deuce and a half.
Yep. And you're starting now to be able to haul more than you can fit in a whole wagon train, and you can fit it into this little space, and you can protect it. And then you can drive that thing far faster than you ever could have moved it in horses. And it can go a lot farther. And it can keep going the next day, that fast, that far, assuming, you know, that you don't blow a tire or a spark plug and everything else. And it went wrong frequently at that period of time as they were getting the technology.
Oh, it still goes wrong.
But, I mean, and that is the underpinning of the logistics, right?
Yeah, and I think it's important to think about the fact that in most military structures, about 80% of your structure is supported logistics. Only 20% of those people are actually fighting. The rest of the people are making sure these people can keep on fighting.
Right. Did I see a hand real quick before Peter goes? Or?
Well, I didn't know it was appropriate. I just want to say that on-the-ground logistics are still absolutely essential.
Yeah.
Prime example, Desert Storm. I was with the 101st. We did this massive air assault. Took essentially most of the division over 2 days, 100 miles deep, roughly, into Iraq. We still had all the trucks and all the Humvees and all that stuff following along behind because we couldn't resupply everybody with helicopters. There were just too many people there, and they needed too much stuff. And so in the old days, it used to be that the animal-driven supply trains, most of what they hauled was animal feed. Because to extend the lines, they had to feed all those animals to keep going. Today it's gas. You still got to carry the gas. And that's probably the biggest thing you got to haul.
And really one of the things that steps back, just another step from that, is the technological innovations that allow the support of this, canned food. Being able to prepare things in a way that they keep, and that you can transport them, and that you can source them from literally the other side of the world. Even in World War I, they were taking food over. And before the United States joined the war, we were already contributing with non-military contributions to support.
Which is hard. Like, where do you draw the line?
Right, you're giving it to people to fight. Yes, all right, Peter, your turn.
Okay, I'm actually going to take this in a little bit of a different direction into what is generally known as fourth generation warfare at this point. I don't know if anybody's at all familiar with John Robb's Brave New War. Okay. John Robb was an analyst and an officer, and he's pretty much made a career off of looking at the way things are changing, the way that various military and paramilitary systems are getting more agile. And in Brave New War, he brings up the investment versus return in a military operation. And he points out, say in Iraq, how much we spent to secure such and such a piece of infrastructure for the sake of winning hearts and minds and kind of winning over the populace by, instead of just blowing everything up, rebuilding everything after it's been blown up, whether we knocked it down during the invasion or the insurgents knocked it down later. We spend hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars on infrastructure, and a cell of 4 dudes would spend maybe $2,000 to blow it up. The best example I could come up with actually happened a couple years ago, just outside of Kobani in Syria, where the Kurds have been fighting ISIS for the last couple of years. All over social media, there was all kinds of celebratory pictures and video because ISIS had put one of their flags up on a hill over Kobani, and we bombed it. Great. We just dropped an $84,000 bomb to get a flag and 2 booger eaters.
$25 flag.
Yep. That is not a good return on the investment, and that is why, long story short, we're losing. Because if they can do more, and if they can get that disproportionate effect with less logistical output, they can be quicker, they can be more agile, and ultimately they can wear us down. And that is the end goal of guerrilla warfare, is never to actually destroy the enemy, it is to wear the enemy down. And guerrilla warfare is a major component of modern warfare for a couple of reasons. One, after World War II, especially after World War I and World War II, or after the World War, I mean, not only did you have the capability of carpet bombing cities to rubble, or shelling them to rubble. I think, was it Kursk, where the biggest artillery bombardment in history flattened the city.
The World War II.
Yeah.
And that was World War I.
Even right now, North Korea has enough tube artillery aimed at Seoul to turn that city to sand without ever needing to use a nuke. So, between having that kind of destructive potential, how do you wage war without just hitting the reset button on the human race? Well, you do it sneaky. You do it in such a way that, particularly the Western nations that have moral qualms about just plastering somebody to dust anymore, well, you keep it at such a low level that they proportionately can't retaliate to that level. You go in, you hit them, you run away. Some of that has been a factor in Eastern warfare for centuries. You look at the Romans versus the Parthians. You had heavy infantry versus light bow-armed cavalry for the most part. You still see that same dichotomy today.
So let's talk a little bit about tactics changes, right? You're talking about guerrilla warfare now. So still in our second section, let's talk about some of the critical tactics changes that happened in the World War. But across this period of transition, guerrilla warfare is a key tactic that we began to use. The carpet bombing, or completely wiping things out on the shelves, new tactics that weren't available to us. I mean, I remember referring back to some of the beginnings of this happening. I remember reading in the Napoleonic Wars some of the description from Napoleon's officers during one of the pitched field battles against the Russians. The officers writing about their experience of watching these Russian soldiers in the back rank who couldn't engage. They were there to move forward once the guys in front of them were gone. And they didn't have muskets that could reach beyond that. And so they were waiting for their chance to engage. And Napoleon was actively using cannons and taking out these guys in the back. And they held rank. And just the reaction of these French officers that were watching this, that are like, you're supposed to run. We're killing you and you can't do anything about it, but you stayed there. And I mean, that's kind of the beginning of moving toward this period where we can destroy things that can't touch us. And, but, you know, so that's one aspect of guerrilla warfare, these long-range attack tactics. What are other tactics that we want to talk about that could change?
Storm troop tactics.
Mobility, exactly.
Mobile.
So, yeah.
And well, so let's talk about how that differentiates from guerrilla tactics, right? Because you could conflate the two, and I think they're what's separated.
So I'll jump on that. So I will say that guerrilla tactics is not something new, right? Like we've had.
We're famous for doing it in the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, but
right?
like Romans had to face guerrillas.
Yeah.
They faced local guerrilla forces that were killing them. But I think what's amazing about guerrilla warfare now is exactly what Peter was saying, is that a guerrilla can arm himself with a $200, $400 gun, or then $200 worth of explosives, come up against a squad of American soldiers that are worth $10,000, whatever, of training, equipment, going to the millions if you're talking about cost of life, cost of training, etc. And he wipes them out. $200 worth of explosives, $400 worth of ammunition. That's like the cost to benefit ratio is staggering, right? Like that's why guerrilla warfare now is so effective, because the damage that you can incur is exponential. Versus before, guerrilla warfare is like, oh, well, you got a farmer and then you got a Roman soldier. I mean, yeah, you can kill 3 Roman soldiers, but it's still
you can do some damage.
There's some.
You've got to run.
But you don't
have the disproportionate level to do damage.
There's some form of parity, right?
Yeah.
Like you will still lose men with guerrilla warfare, and they will lose men, and so you're still not getting yourself that much of an advantage. There's a lot of moral advantage, but not a much force advantage. But now, it's crazy. Guerrilla warfare, the cost of guerrilla warfare and terrorism is huge. I mean, the Americans should know that the cost of terrorism can inflict great damage to you. So that's guerrilla. I would say that's a defining trait of guerrilla warfare. Why it's so effective. Yeah, this is tactics. And then I think like the idea of stormtroopers or the rapid reactionary forces is like the opposite. You put really expensive troops who can move really fast and have them face off in very critical places at like engagements that are like high intensity but maybe low stakes. Like Iraq is a really good example of that. Iraq and Iran wars, where we were able to move like forces that are really highly trained, like Marine, like recon forces or our rapid reactionary forces into areas, and they're highly overtrained for this situation, but they're able to do it quickly, and then get the lower cost quote unquote forces into the area to do their stuff. Like special forces should not be holding ground. Their job is to be at the place that they need to be really quickly, and then go back and being super awesome, being ninjas.
Actually, technically, special forces. I'm going to get pedantic here for a second. Special forces' job is unconventional warfare, which means going in where nobody else is, training the locals, making a militia out of the locals, and waging war with the locals. That's special forces. Special operations forces covers recon, MARSOC, SEALs, special forces, rangers, PJs, combat controllers. So, just my pedantic moment.
Yeah, pedantic. So I'll go specialer forces. Right? The ability of shock troopers is that there is a person more than a grunt, right? Like we're talking about the Panzer. I can't remember them, but like so elite German forces, the Panzerstreifen or whatever. Like their job is, hey, we are on half tracks, so which is like jeeps but with tracks instead of wheels, and we are a little bit more trained than the regular German force. And when we go to a place, we inflict a lot of damage, and then we leave on our half tracks. That's the idea of like the shock trooper idea, is that we can apply force to an area in a very specific moment, in a very specific area, at the time it's needed.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. Like the ability to do that nowadays in modern warfare is, I think, it's a defining trait of like the ability. I was reading a book on Army Special Forces unit. Green Berets, yeah. And their training. Their idea was like rapid violence. That is the defining trait of their sort of special forces. Very rapid violence that's brought in a controlled situation immediately.
Speed, surprise, and violence in
Yeah.
action.
So I think that's a cool thing. And it's opposite, right?
Right.
Guerrilla warfare is cheap units against more expensive units. Where shock troopers are really expensive units against less expensive units. If we're talking about video games here, which we should, because people sign it. But continuing.
All right, Scott.
I'm old enough, and I think there are probably a few other people in the room who are old enough to remember when the United States started to put refrigerated Coca-Cola on the top of hills in the jungles of Vietnam. An army, we've heard an army marches on its stomach. It's a famous old Napoleonic saying. An army marches on its stomach. Then a modern army marches on gasoline. The American army marches on cold Coke.
Big box pops.
Yep.
Which can be argued is a weakness.
It's very much a weakness.
So much on big box air-conditioned fogs that really result in stagnation.
The big knock on the U.S. Air Force operations, current operations, is they'll only stay as long as their big box air conditioner can run.
That's the Air Force for you.
That's the knock on the Air Force. When they can't supply gasoline or diesel fuel for the generator, the Air Force picks up and moves someplace else. Doesn't matter what else is going on, because of all their electronics and the dependence of all of that gear, all of that sophistication on that supply line. Okay.
And I'm actually going to get into that because I've complained for years about over-reliance on technology at the expense of on-the-ground skill. And I've seen it firsthand. Again, when I was working for the tracking guys, I had a squad of Marines. Most of them were new, most of them were boots. But some of them were NCOs, corporals, sergeants, who really should have at least known the basics. I'm walking them through a creek where they're following the track, and I hit him with a contact left. And I watch every one of these Marines turn, take a knee in the open to engage. And I went down the line, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead. And I killed the entire squad before they got the point that armor is not magic. Get your ass down in the dirt and get some cover, because there are bullets coming at you that are going to end you. But unfortunately, again, so much focus has been put on the whiz-bang and the tech and learning to use the radios and the computers, that a lot of the basics of what keep a soldier or a Marine alive in the dirt are getting short shrift. And in large part, we can actually thank the fact that this hasn't been disastrous to the fact that for the most part, kind of like you were saying, we've been fighting a bunch of booger eaters with $200 AKs in the desert for the last 10, 15 years.
They can do amazing stuff with their $50 cell phones. Amazing stuff.
Oh yeah, I know. They've tried to kill me a couple times with them.
All right, so do we have questions on this section? And then we'll move on. Yes?
So I want to elaborate on the guerrilla warfare thing. Guerrilla warfare isn't new. It's been around for millennia. But there's a different spin to it now, and it ties in with social media and the internet. Makes a huge difference, which is why your example, the $84,000 bomb on the flag, sometimes that is cost effective.
Well,
It
it's cost
depends on
effective
the
somewhere.
optics.
Yeah.
It depends on the optics. Sometimes it's important to make a statement like that to show that the insurgents aren't in charge of the battlefield, right?
Well,
So-
you're venturing something. I mean, social media is new, but psychological warfare is.
Okay, I'm actually going to pause this because I think it's an excellent point and I want to cover it, but I think it's very much a part of the third section, where we're talking about where we've gone today, because that is very much a reality of the modern war. is opinion and perception are almost as important as actual control of territory.
Yeah.
And we'll go there in just a second. So we'll come back to that. Yes?
As to Peter's example of losing, I don't even know the proper word for it, but those on the
Basic
dirt
infantry
skills.
skills.
Basic infantry skills, sure. Your words are better than mine. What is the, at what point did that transition begin? Like when we lost, when did we start losing that? What was that
Are you doing a good transition now? We always have grunts who are really bad at doing basic.
Well,
that's
it's
not
just
like
everybody's lazy and idiots.
The
That's the
FNG
natural-
concept
But
is a tried and true.
when you're seeing an entire unit do
Yeah,
it,
I guess, so you're right, yeah.
when you're seeing guys who are supposed to be taking security doing the rucksack flop in the open in a
Yeah.
field
And NCO
in the middle of the
yeah,
day.
yeah.
And what I was just taught, the rucksack flop in the middle of the field, that was actually on the ground in Afghanistan, in Helmand. A lot of it, I think a lot of it actually started about the beginning of the Iraq War when the emphasis started being on body armor. We had to up armor everything. And
And there was a lot of politics, wasn't it, right?
There was
The whole
a
thing
lot- it was
why aren't we
entirely
giving- Why aren't we giving our soldiers enough body armor? It's like, sometimes they don't.
It was entirely a political bludgeon that the opposition was using. as
So you get
administration.
radio operators who live in an armored base and they have to wear body
You
armor
have-
inside base.
You have special forces soldiers in the mountains in Afghanistan having to wear plates and helmets. I have worn body armor in multiple environments, and it is crushing. The more weight you put on the soldier, the more he starts to turtle. The more his vision starts to tunnel in on how miserable he is and how much he's being crushed. I walked through flat plowed fields in Helmand with so much weight that if we'd been taking contact on the move, we'd have been screwed because I couldn't feel my hands because the circulation was being cut off in my arms by the combined weight of body armor, ammunition, rucksack, and weapon.
How much of that do you think is the United States' inability to take casualties?
Most of it.
Yeah, I'd say a lot.
It is a combination of, as with anything else, it's a combination of a number of factors. It is political. It is bureaucratic, because so much of the military leadership has turned into a bureaucracy. It started a number of years back with looking for managers rather than leaders. So you have officers and NCOs who are terrified for their career if something goes wrong. So everything must be by the book, because the book will ensure that nothing goes wrong. Well, things go wrong anyway. And potentially they could go even worse if your guys are being crushed under the weight of crap that they don't need in 130-degree heat. So a lot of it has to do with that ever-growing load of, oh, well, now you have to take this, and you have to take this, and you have to take this, and you have to take this, instead of, how many have seen Band of Brothers?
Why are you even here if you haven't
Watch
seen
it every
that? Are you
time.
serious? Why are you here if you haven't
The,
seen that?
the assault on the 88s on D-Day. Weapons and ammo drop everything else.
I love that line.
That would never happen today. Ever. Why? Because if you tried to do that, and somebody back in the chain who wasn't out on that patrol, who's sitting in an air-conditioned TOC, Tactical Operations Center, for those who don't habla the lingo, sitting in an air-conditioned TOC, sipping his coffee, looking at a pred feed. Hey, zoom in on that guy. Is he wearing his helmet?
I'm sorry, I gotta jump in here. The reason that guy exists is because of the rest of us not being able to think of the possible idea that somebody might get hurt or killed in a battle.
Right, I was gonna say. it's
That's
not because it's-
purely
yeah.
American public at large
Sure,
demands that.
Yeah.
And it is counterproductive and it's darn dangerous to our military.
Right.
Okay,
It
I'm
is
going to take.
fatal.
I'm going to jump in real quick because I want to make sure we have enough time to cover the third section, which is modern warfare, all the way to today. There's my 10-minute warning. I saw it coming. All right.
Oh, 20.
Oh, 20?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Do we have all the way to the hour?
That was a double backflip we just saw.
Okay, great. So good, that gives us a little bit more time to really dig into where we're at today. We've covered it tangentially in some of the aspects, but let's really head there. And I mean, so let's jump into an area that we've kept trying to touch on, which is the political and the social and the interaction level that we have with the military and what's happening in an individual operation that was just executed and practically get live streamed to social media of
Not
this
practically,
happening.
it does.
It does. In
Yeah.
some
I mean,
cases,
how many headlock cam videos can you find on YouTube?
right.
Come on.
Well, I mean, but they aren't usually live streamed. But that's my nitpicking for the moment. But yes, but you get the actual footage that a soldier captured and displayed back, and terrorists absolutely use it.
Yeah.
There, it's definitely live streamed. You know, here's our live stream execution of the day, right? And we look at this layer of interaction, this layer of intervention by so many parties that have really no business making these decisions, really don't understand what's being decided, and yet it tremendously affects policy. And in some ways, it's not a new problem. Like, Peter, as you were saying, now we have all these bureaucrats in the military. In some ways, that's a return to the way things have always been.
I mean,
You look at the British military, especially later British military,
Yeah.
your officers were there because their dad was somebody.
Or even Roman legions. The third ranking person in a Roman legion is a politician. That is
Right.
his job.
Right.
Because he tells everybody back in Rome what this legion is doing.
But the difference today, you'll find, is that the busybodies have a lot more instantaneous
Yeah.
Yes,
ability
absolutely.
to instantaneously
Absolutely.
look over that NCO's shoulder.
Yeah. It's more difficult for the sergeant to hide what needed to happen than it used to be.
And I mean, isn't that an NCO's job, right? Their job is to be able
To get them what
create
needed to be
decisions
done, and
without an
sometimes-
officer over their shoulder. Because sometimes that is what's necessary for action.
Sure, so let's jump into
Yeah,
this.
sure.
This is where we're at. Do you want to finish the point that you were starting to make earlier, where you were bringing up social media and this conversation, and then we can go from there?
Fact is, and actually in a way this ties into what I just said a minute ago about our reluctance to
Accept
suffer casualties, right?
accept
Right.
the inevitability of
Yeah.
war, and that is that people get hurt.
And the fact is that the American public actually, I was on being interviewed on a radio show back in about 2003, and in the course of conversation, the radio host, I mentioned that I'd been in Desert Storm with the 101st. He said, well, why didn't you go all the way to Baghdad when you had the chance? And I said, because nobody wanted to make Iraq the 51st state for 10 years, right? The fact of the matter is, anybody who knew anything about Iraq at the time would recognize that this is not a 1 or 2 or 3 year investment. This is something you spend a minimum of 10 years at, and probably 20 if you want to get it right. But the American public cannot tolerate a long war. And Desert Storm made it even worse, because you have a 3-day war, nobody gets killed except the bad guys. That's wonderful.
Tanks, amazing. Tanks are amazing. Armor's amazing. Everybody should be in tanks and armor.
From then
Abrams
on,
is
we
invulnerable.
wanted- From then on, we wanted a war that was neat and clean and quick. And there's no such thing. Desert Storm was an aberration. Anyway, social media and the way ISIS and these other folks are playing it plays directly to the American public. They're trying to influence the American public to give up. That's the
How
whole
many,
Go ahead.
how many people think that ISIS is the primary existential threat as far as Islamic Jihad goes?
As long as terrorism
far
or
as-
general?
As long as
As far
in
as
terms
Islamic
of
Jihad
jihad.
goes.
Oh,
That is precisely what they want you to think. And it's a, it's a load of crap.
Right. He's like, no, I don't think that. I would.
No, but let's be
Is-
honest.
Why would I do
the,
that?
The media is telling you that that's what they think, right? Like, it's the new,
And it's
the
part
new
of, it
alphabet
is
soup of the
part
day.
of their own information operations. That they've been encouraging this ever since they first kind of sprung up, which they didn't really, if you really look at it. These are the core, the same bunch of psychopaths and high-functioning retards that were running around with Zarqawi in AQI back in 2004. In fact, nobody's talked about it lately, but particularly a couple years ago, there were a lot of indicators that al-Baghdadi, the big caliph of the Islamic State, was a sock puppet to Izzat al-Duri, who was Saddam's number 2 that we never caught. But the point, and you made it very well, is everything they have put out has been calculated to push our buttons.
And let's be honest, psychological warfare is not new, right? Psychological warfare has been
This is a
happening
new
forever.
dimension of it.
Yeah. No, but what is new is you're saying social media. Is that the fact that the populace, again, people who really shouldn't have any, say in what's happening in the military, have way higher access to the military than before. Yeah.
Social media is a new and quicker manifestation of mob politics.
Yeah. So that's what it is that psychological warfare itself is not new. But the ramifications of psychological warfare is higher reaching now, I think, because of
and the immediacy.
Yeah, immediacy of communication,
Yep.
which is great. Radios are wonderful. Everybody loves radios, and in war, everybody loves radios. But
Unless you're the guy who has to carry it.
And then I see your question.
Well, I just wanted to know, so if you don't think, because I'm totally out of my element, so I wouldn't have raised my hand no matter what your question was, because I didn't want everyone to look at me. But so if you don't think that ISIS is kind of the main threat, like, first of all, what do you think is, and then also, why do you think ISIS wants to be the threat? Is it because they want more funding from the people who support their ideas, or what? Like, I'm just kind of picking your brain.
As far as jihad goes, there is no single monolithic threat.
Okay.
That is why, over the last 2 years, I've come to kind of see that Islamic Jihad, while it is definitely a threat, it is not necessarily an existential threat, because they are too busy tearing each other's guts out
Right.
to ever band together into the single caliphate that so many of them want to see.
Right.
ISIS is very good at branding, and it got some more branding with the brutality of some of its actions after it got used as a convenient bludgeon in Central Asia by tyrannical governments that decided to crack down on their political opponents that happened to be Muslim, at least nominally
Under the
Muslim,
umbrella of they might be ISIS.
because they were ISIS.
Right.
And so you got this influx a couple of years ago of a whole bunch of Uzbeks and Tajiks who weren't even really faithful Muslims. They were secular Muslim by identity only.
Right.
But they figured, hey, if we're going to be punished for the crime, we may as well be guilty. And so they came sweeping in to join ISIS in Syria and Iraq.
Right.
And then you started to see the people getting burned alive in cages and drowned on beaches and things like that.
Scott had a comment.
Oh, I was just going to say that further to Peter's point about the managerial officer corps. If there were an officer anywhere in the United States military who put forward a battle plan that assumed 10% casualties, he'd get run out of the service today.
The number of officers who made it past captain that were worth a damn that I know, I can count on one hand.
Doesn't involve the whole
Which part of your hand? Scott, go ahead.
But so there's a strong argument to be made that there are no longer warriors, as we understand the term, in the officer corps of the U.S. military. They're not there anymore. They don't survive.
Generals especially are politicians.
Oh yeah.
The higher they go, the more political it gets, and the less ability they have to sustain casualties, and so the less ability they have to project force.
The closest to an exception I could say would be James Mattis. And I can say that because I've met the man, and I've served with many who served under him.
I'm gonna interrupt for a second, Peter, and take us in a little bit different direction. So we don't have much time left. We've had a really good conversation about some of the aspects of the way that our society gets involved in the war now that was never possible in the past, even at the beginning of this transition. But let's talk technical for a minute. Let's talk a little bit about some of the what?
Are we to the 50 or are we to the hour?
The schedule.
Okay, that was my question. I thought we had 10 minutes, and we did have 10 minutes. Okay, so I guess we'll
Let's wrap
finish. Well, let's wrap it up then. I wanted to go a little bit further as well, because the technical aspects of what can we do nowadays.
It's amazing.
We talked a little bit about drones, we talked a little bit about some of the other things, but this social aspect, I think, is hugely important for you as authors, right? Because as you think about a modern war, or a community, or a civilization, and we're at LTUE, right? You make stuff up. That's why you're here. We create worlds. That's what LTUE is all about, is world building. Science fiction and fantasy is about you saying what if and doing something different than what is. And so as you think about that, take these ideas with you and go, you know what? The society around my military and their involvement in it, especially in a sci-fi context, is huge. And your government's management of how information gets to people and what people believe. I mean, think about Fahrenheit 451 for a moment, right? We're winning this war until your city got bombed. And so I hope this has been helpful to everybody. I'm going to give each of the moderators or panel members a moment to just finish off with, here's where my books are, and whatever else you guys want to say as a closing shot. So Scott, we'll start at that end.
Dragon Moon actually comes out June the 10th. Navy SEALs on the moon.
There you
This is
go.
amazing.
It's another mic drop right there.
My book will be in the Eagle Mountain Arts Alliance, which was supposed to be in the bookstore, but it's not. So I won't pin my book. But if you want to talk about the complexity of culture around warfare, definitely take a look at Joe Haldeman's Forever War. Great little sci-fi military book, and just wonderful read. Forever War. It's what happens when soldiers have to deal with near light travel and can fight over generations and just over multiple landmasses. So wonderful read. Go do it.
All my stuff's on Amazon. Got the American Victorian series. It's my first. It's 4 books. I'm working on number 5 right now. Contractors in the near future. Crapsack. Pretty much extrapolating a lot of this stuff that I talked about today. I think I got I don't remember which one. Kill You On is a standalone contractors with pirates and Chinese commandos in South China Sea. And then I've got a supernatural series called the Jet Horn series as well.
Great.
How about
Thanks for
that?
coming.
Okay.